Hey, so Rachel is going to tell us about new ways to garble arithmetic circuits.
All right. I am going to tell you about how to garble arithmetic circuits, and this is joint work with Han-Jun Lee, my student at UW, Marshall Wall, fabulous sitting there, Jianren Liu, who is right now in China. All right, so let's do it. Oh, wow, okay. So we are all very familiar with garbled circuits. This is really probably every cryptographer knows. This is a tool that enables us to convert a circuit into here, a Boolean circuit into a garbled format together with a pair of keys for each wire I call AIBI for the input wire I. And the guarantee is that given one of the label for each of the input wire, which is chosen according to the input you want to evaluate on. So if xi is 1, you choose AI. If xy is 0, you choose bi. Given the garbled circuit together with the input labels, we can get the output. The nice thing is that that's the only thing one can get. Okay, and this is formulated by saying that in this case, I'm going to consider a notion of hiding where we don't care about hiding the circuit, but we only care about hiding the input. But you can, of course, also talk about hiding the circuit. Then there's a simulator that, given the circuit and the output, which we are willing to reveal, is able to simulate everything. Sorry, this should be L of x. Is able to simulate the garbled circuit together with the input label without knowing the input at all. So anything about the input beyond the output remains hidden. It is very important that in this formulation that the input labels are very short. The length of the input label should be independent of the size of the circuit, right? And so this bit length t is independent of the circuit size or the depth or any parameter. And furthermore, another nice feature is that the input encoding is actually really, really simple. That it looks at each of the input bit xi one by one independently. This is called the decomposable property. And the second is that it's a very simple computation based on the input value. Here it's just a selection, and you can write it as an affine function. All right, so garbled circuit together with its later better formulation of randomized encoding is really the Swiss Army knife of cryptography. And if you look, they're just everywhere to the point that we don't even pay attention if a paper uses garbled circuit. And they're just really everywhere, right? Oh, sorry for the citations. The two key properties that we often rely on when we use garbled circuit is that first, it has really simple garbling in the sense that the garbling algorithm has low depths and could even be local. The second is that it has really simple input encoding, that as I said, the input labels are short, they are decomposable encoding, and they're affine encoding. These, if we look at all these applications, these are the properties that we use of the garbled circuit. What about techniques? What do we know about this Swiss Army knife? How to build this Swiss Army knife? Turns out that we have one dominant method, which is the encrypted truth table method. If you have seen it, you probably know that this method is basically look at each of the gates one by one, and we're going to encrypt the truth table of the gate and permute it. Then we call it the encrypted truth table method. This method has received so many optimizations. It's impossible to list all the citations. In recent years, that we're really moving towards shipping this encrypted truth table method to the practice. So here, when we're talking about optimizations, we're not just talking about asymptotics. We're really actually counting bits and bytes, and we can achieve practical efficiency. Okay? And the state of the art in this really, really nice paper by Lawrence and Mike, is that instead of having 4 ciphertexts, which will be 4 lambda per multiplication or addition gate, they can actually achieve 1.5 ciphertext per gate. Really mysterious. But that is the level. We care about the concrete constants from 4 down to 1.5. What are the other techniques? Well, based on the Garble circuit, this technique, we can build a Garble Turing machine or RAM. Okay? And if we hit it with IO or functional encryption, then we can even get a succinct version of the Garble RAM. And the other method, well, there's the work that achieves the reusability, which says that I can actually garble the circuit once and then keep reusing it with different input encodings. And all of the input encodings are short, independent of the circuit complexity. And this technique is in some sense deviating the most away from the encrypted truth table method so far. It really relies crucially on fully homomorphic encryption and attribute-based encryption, but it still uses the Garble circuit as a component. Okay, so basically, so far, there's no doubt that the encrypted truth table is still the most widely used method in Garbling, invented in the 80s, and we're still using it day by day. So the question is, can we do it differently? And to explore, can we do it differently? I'm going to explore a slight variant of this problem, which was proposed by Benny Applebaum, Ishai, Benny, Yuval, and Eyal. It has to be an AIK, right? Sorry, it should be AIK 11. And here they propose, why don't we look at arithmetic circuits and try to garble that? Well, arithmetic circuit now are circuits that contains arithmetic gates, addition and multiplication gates, and they do arise pretty naturally. For example, in scientific computation, in machine learning, in crypto systems, and for different applications that we might care about different underlying ring, we do those arithmetic operations in. We're going to primarily focus in this talk the ring of the integers, integer computation, and the ring of Zp for any modulus p. But you could really consider anything, right? You can consider the polynomial ring as well, or anything else. So there is a baseline solution when we look at arithmetic circuit, which is, well, we can always convert it first into a Boolean one and just apply the encrypted truth table method that we love and know. However, to deviate from encrypted truth table, I want to ask, or AIK asked, can we garble arithmetic circuit without Booleanizing the computation? Okay. And why? Well, there are multiple reasons. Sometimes bit decomposition could be very expensive, and it could be actually impossible to do in certain settings. But more, what motivates me is that it will kind of force us to deviate from the encrypted truth table method, because the ring may be exponentially sized. The wire value could be from an exponentially large domain. It is impossible to enumerate the truth table of the gate. And by doing so, we might, in a very unexpected way, arrive nevertheless at those goals like efficiency and modularity that we care about, but in a completely different route. So what do we know about garbling arithmetic circuits? The AIK work gives the first construction. Oh, so forgot about that. So far, I haven't told you what's the definition. So let's go with the definition first. Very similarly, we want to have a garbling algorithm that converts an arithmetic circuit into the garble format. But now the input labels are not pairs of keys, but rather are affine function. Right? These affine functions are still defined by 2 keys, but those 2 keys are now coefficients. Right? And the input label for a particular ring element xi is ai(xi) plus bi evaluated in the ring. Okay? And those functions may actually, the coefficients themselves may be a vector, So that's why, and xi is a scalar, and that's why the label itself is a vector in the ring. Now the rest is the same. Given those labels, input label and the Garble circuit, I want to compute the output and reveal only the output. Same, we want all the nice properties that we love, we rely on from Garble circuit to hold. We would like the Garbling algorithm to be shallow. We would like the input labels to be short, independent of the circuit complexity. And we already have the decomposability and affine encoding in this formulation. Okay. Well, if we think about it, this indeed forces us to do something different from Boolean garbling, because I have to treat these input elements as ring elements, right? However, this definition itself does not really exclude the garbling method. Internally tries to do some bit decomposition of the ring elements and arrive at actually bits and use the same kind of Boolean garbling afterwards. So therefore, for my purpose of deviating from encrypted truth table, I'm going to care about an additional property. This additional property is that my garbling and evaluation algorithm should both be black box in the implementation of the arithmetic operations over the ring. Okay? Never use the code, the circuit that implements the addition and multiplication. This is a way for me, asking for this property is a way to enforce us to not try to Booleanize intermediate values and the arithmetic operations. Yeah.
The ring is a specific ring?
The ring is still going to be a specific ring. Indeed, in this case, the better case you would want to have is a construction that is fully black box in the ring, not just black box in the addition and multiplication implementation, but also in the ring elements representation and only use very small interface from the ring. This would be a fully black box implementation. And in that case, one would, with one construction, automatically get arithmetic garbling for every possible ring. And that would indeed be really nice. Unfortunately, this dream was crashed. And previous work showed that this is impossible to do. Hence, you need to have some access to the ring. But nevertheless, for my purpose of deviating from the encrypted truth table, it's enough for me to only ask for not using the code of addition and multiplication. All right. So given the definition, what do we know? What do we know about the Garbling arithmetic circuit? Not that much. AIK showed that assume LWE, there is an arithmetic garbling scheme for bounded integer computation. So they're considering an underlying ring that is over the integers. And furthermore, if I consider integer computation, the value grows like doubly exponentially with the depth of the computation. So it's in order for everything to be efficient, they put this constraint that this is an integer computation, but has the guarantee that all the wire values is bounded by a priori bound B. Okay. And they actually give another construction, which basically says what I mentioned already before. The Garbling algorithm actually going to use the Chinese remainder theorem to explicitly do bit decomposition inside, and afterwards apply Yale's Garble circuit. As a result, it doesn't satisfy the property of being black box in addition and multiplication. Okay? And I won't compare with this construction in the rest of the talk. I will mostly compare with the first one, which is more truly arithmetic. All right, so what are our results? We tackle 3 different models. The first is the same as AIK, bounded integer computation. The second, we managed to do Zp-computation. The third, we consider a mixed computation where your circuit can have both bounded integer operation and the Boolean operation. In all of those models, we give construction based on both LWE and the Paillier. And the Paillier is a new assumption that is that makes this talk fit the purpose of this workshop. I feel kind of weird because everybody has been so harmonious talking about things abstract and like, you know, and I'm showing you like concrete constants. All right, so other than diversifying the assumption, our bounded integer computation significantly improved the efficiency. This garbling actually has constant rate that I am going to define constant rate very soon. Our Zp-computation is black box in the addition and multiplication, satisfy the special property I asked for. And finally, the mixed integer computation is providing a more flexible model where I think a lot of natural applications fits within, if you think about deep neural networks. And it is also more efficient. All right, so more formally, what is the rate of the garbling that I've been talking about? By rate, what I mean is that the size of the garble circuit together with the input encoding in comparison with the size of the circuit, the number of gates in the circuit description times L. What is L? L is the bits, number of bits needed to represent the elements in the ring. Okay, so in the Boolean computation, L is 1. In the B bounded integer computation, L is log B. In Zp computation, L is log P. So what is this quantity? C times L is basically the size of the computation tableau if you were to write down all the values that have been evaluated in the computation. So we feel it is fair to compare the size of a garbling together with the computation tableau size in the clear.
So of that, when you compute the size of C hat, don't you also want to take into account the bit size that you need to write every element?
Yes, it is counting it. It counts the bit size of writing every element.
So I'm talking about the C hat.
I am talking about C hat too, yeah.
So there's a, so C hat, you're talking about number of bits.
Yeah.
C, so
In C,
just
I
number of
talk
gates.
about number of gates.
Yeah.
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 That's what you need to evaluate if you wouldn't garble. So L sub x, that's like the input?
That's the length of the input encoding. Input labels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
wait, I'm confused, sorry, I want to go back to your question. C hat is the number of gates in C hat?
No, C hat is just, yeah, it's a description length. It's like, think about garble circuit. What would be C hat in garble circuit? It's gonna be the number of Boolean gates times those garbled gates. Like each garble gate is roughly lambda size, so the C hat size is the C times lambda. It will be the same in our case, but so we really count the bit length of describing C hat.
But unlike the usual notion of rate bigger or smaller to more understanding of how you see.
Yes, you could potentially get a sublinear rate. I will come to it. Yeah.
Can you maybe say again why it makes sense to have L? Like what?
Because there are situations where, for example, for NC1, you have arithmetic garbling where the C hat is empty. There's simply no garble gate at all. But then the length of the label is going to depend
I
on
meant the
the.
small L, the denominator.
on
Yeah, like because it seems like the rate is you're encoding something, right? I could just send you C itself, and it would have cost me, you know, capital. It would cost me absolute value of C, and not the absolute value of C.
You could do that also, but I feel that it is sort of, if you view it, you can definitely have such a definition. And then everything is just gonna, rate is gonna be multiplied with L. But the comparison is gonna be the same between different methods. I feel it's kind of fair to compare the size of the garbling with the total length of writing down your computation tableau in the clear. But yeah, you can also consider differently. That's what your wife is saying.
No, I was just saying, like, it seems you'd want to compare two things, right? One is I'm just going to send you the circuit and then the input, and you will compute it by yourself. And the other one is that I'm going to send you the garbled thing, and again, you will compute by yourself. And the rate, I don't know, I would think would be the rate between the lengths of these things. I don't know.
Maybe it's natural definition in the context of existing practical garbling schemes. I would say more gate by gate.
Okay, but anyway, it's a definition.
Here
It's a
also the
constant. You can
circuit
always.
is how one
definition,
put
yeah.
together. So it's not like you need to send circuits. You just need to send the input and the circuits.
It's really a suitable for gate by gate approach.
Yeah. Okay, so what would be the rate for Yau's garbling?
Let me take one step back. When you talk C hat in the arithmetic setup, so there C hat, because you want to be oblivious, will C hat and C will have will C hat also be defined over the same ring?
You will see what C hat is, yeah. Yeah. No, it will not be the same ring. If it's the same ring, so we don't know how to do it, yeah. Okay. C hat is some Boolean circuit, you can even think about it. All right, so what's the rate of the Boolean Yau's Garble circuit? Well, that rate is basically lambda, as we can see. What's the rate if I applied the baseline solution, which is I first convert an arithmetic circuit into a Boolean one and then apply Yau's Garble circuit? Well, basically then every additional multiplication gate, if I use, in the integer case, I use the fastest asymptotic integer multiplication algorithm, which has complexity L times log L, then we will get this circuit size and we will get the rate, which is lambda times log L. Okay. All right, so now I can present the first result, which is for bounded integer garbling. Using DCR assumption over Paillier group, we can get a constant rate when the size of the integer elements is roughly the length of the Paillier. It's comparable to the length of the Paillier key. And this is the first constant rate garbling for arithmetic circuit. If you compare with the baselines, it does improve pretty well. Compared with lambda factor versus constant factor. And if you compare with AIK scheme, then they have a rate which is the same as the LWE dimension. You can actually get down to even sublinear rate. And as Yuval is saying, however, so far, we will only know such schemes using either IO, or you can use on the reusable garbling method, which uses fully homomorphic encryption. However, you will have the caveat that you only achieve sublinear rate if the depth is sufficiently small. Okay. And our result doesn't care about the depth of the computation at all. Sorry for showing you concrete numbers. It turns out that our numbers also are not too bad. Basically, we fixed some setting where I'm not going to explain all the settings, but when you do the calculation for this specific setting, you can actually compute yourself what's the size of a multiplication gate, garbled multiplication gate. It turns out that comparing with the state of the art Boolean garbling, we go from the size, which is level of megabyte, to the level of kilobyte. So that's roughly 600 to 800 times smaller than the Boolean baseline. In terms of computation, it's less clear. It's roughly a trade-off between one multiplication mod n, where n is the Paillier modulus, versus 450, roughly 450 AES calls. So I think it does show some potential for concrete efficiency. However, this is not the focus of our work, so definitely worth exploring. Okay, no more constants. All right. Then we can handle Zp-computation. We can directly garble Zp-computation. And the rate is going to be worse. That is going to be proportional to the key length of the DCR or the LWE dimension. And this doesn't compare very well with the Boolean baseline asymptotically, but I think that concretely it will probably be better. So the feature of this one is that we only make black box use of addition and multiplication.
Sorry, so you said how like the size of the circuit scales, but like how does the evaluation time scale?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers here. It's gonna be very similar to the size.
Okay, because you're doing, I'm assuming you're doing some operation, like public key operation, and garbled circuits usually just like use AES. So that that's faster practices or something?
No, that's what I said at the beginning, that it's roughly you compare how many like multiplication model versus how many AES that two different methods would use. We're roughly one multiplication model versus 450 AES calls. But the efficiency gain is the most obvious in the bounded integer setting. Once you go to Zp, it's less efficient. All right, so finally, let me tell you about this mixed computation, where I think it arises pretty naturally in deep neural net. You can think about it, that it often has some fixed point linear function first, and then it does some non-arithmetic Boolean computation, like the comparison. So we model it as a circuit that contains arithmetic gates, bounded integer arithmetic gates, and then it has a bit decomposition gate somewhere, which is going to convert the ring element into bits. And following that, you can do Boolean computation. Okay. What can we do is that the overhead for those arithmetic gates is the same as constant.
And there's only one time that the composition happens once. It's not back and forth.
Back and forth.
Oh, it could be many.
It's a circuit consisting of any circuit consisting of those gates. And the Boolean computation, those gates are going to have an overhead of lambda, just like in Yao. And then in the middle, the bit decomposition has a heavier overhead. It's kind of quadratic in the key length of the DCR. All right, so in the remaining time, let me try to, how much time do I have?
15 minutes? So if there's bit decomposition, is there's also the opposite direction from bits to?
It turns out that when you have the labels for bits, you can also interpret the bits as a ring element and continue computation. Okay, so let me tell you very quickly about AIK design paradigm. And then in particular, it kind of decomposes the task into Garbling, just addition and multiplication gate separately. And then there is a separate key extension gadget. Okay. And now we'll tell you about, and the key extension is the main focus, the difficulty. I will tell you about our idea for key extension, and hopefully I will tell you about how to handle the bounded integer. All right, so what is the AIK key idea? Is that if I just want to Garble addition, sorry, there should be an addition. That's very easy. What we do is that all the labels are those affine functions, right? Evaluation of affine functions. So if I want to obtain an output label with key coefficient K0, K1, all what I need to do is to have input labels with K0 and K1 here, and with the coefficient R and K1 minus R. So if I just add those two labels together, you will get the output label. And this you can interpret as very easy to Garble. Given the coefficient of the output label function, you can create the label function for the inputs. Evaluation, just addition, and simulation also extremely simple, because this label, one of the label is just purely random, and it needs to satisfy the correctness constraint. So given the output label, you just sample one of the label random and recompute the other label. How do I handle multiplication? Also extremely simple. What we do is that to have completely random label for the input elements. If you multiply, you will get something, but with lots of cross terms. Right? So idea is that you provide more labels to cancel out those cross terms. So evaluation, trust me that this is gonna work out. And what about simulation? Well, notice again that all those labels have the three of them has completely random blinding factor. So all what you do is, again, you sort of randomly sample those three and reverse compute the last one using the output label. So now that I have addition and multiplication, why don't I just Garble arbitrary circuits?
Can you go back for a second? But you started with one label and you multiplied two labels.
Yeah. Jumping, yeah, You're jumping way ahead, yes. So what happens? The problem with composition is that label length is going to explode. I started with label of dimension t. After addition, I get the labels of dimension t. But in order to get multiplication, I need labels of dimension 2t, right? And furthermore, for some of the wires, which has multiple fan out, I even get the labels of dimension 4t. So in other words, that the length of a label in general is going to be exponential in the depth of the computation multiplied with the fan out of that wire. This is not good, and that's why it only handles log depth circuit information theoretically. If you think about this, is the same problem in information theoretic Boolean garbling. Okay? So how can we get around this? Well, the idea is to have something that shrinks the key down. If you think about in Boolean garbling, the use of the PRG is exactly this purpose. So in this case, I want to have a new gadget key extension, which takes a short key for input element X and produces a much longer label for the same element. The formulation is that now the garbling, given the output label function, should give me the input label function, which is much shorter, and some garble table. Evaluation should give me short from the short label expanded to the long label, and simulation should be able to simulate the short label and the garble table. Now, once I have key extension, basically whenever the labels become too long, I just stuck in the key extension gadget to shrink them down to the short labels. And you can simulate as long as all the gadgets has its perfect simulation. So the key now is to design this key extension. For any ring, if I want arithmetic garbling, I just want that key extension in that ring. So let's talk about our ideas in an abstract term, which is easy to understand, no algebra. Suppose I'm just dealing with Boolean values. I'm not doing arithmetic garbling, I'm doing Boolean garbling. Then the wire value is just 0, 1. Then key extension is extremely simple, right? Because I know that the short label is either A plus B if X equals to 1, or it is just B. Sorry, it should be B. Then all what I need to do is to just sort of like match with the output label that I should get, encrypt them using the corresponding key and the output, right? And this is very simple. And basically, I don't even need that much of crypto. I just need one-time secure secret key encryption scheme is enough for me, right? It's one-time secure because the labels are only used once. The problem now is that I need to handle inputs which are not Boolean. And this is, in fact, basically encrypted truth table method. So a way to get around this is that what if my encryption scheme has some nice arithmetic properties? In particular, what if it's linearly homomorphic? In the sense that there is a way to operate on the two ciphertexts and obtain a ciphertext which is encrypted using the sum of the key and the sum of the input. Then what I need to do is in the garble table, provide the ciphertext that encrypts B, encrypts D using B, encrypts C using A. Given any input, let me show you how we can extend the label. But to do that, let's first suppose that the input is actually public. Okay, but we'll fix this later because the wire value is what we want to hide. Then all what we need to do is to use the linear homomorphism property that we're going to do this homomorphic evaluation, which is multiply this ciphertext with a scalar x and add it together with the second ciphertext. What I should get is an encryption under the short label and that encrypts the long label. Right? So how do I evaluate? All what I need to do is to do homomorphic evaluation using the public wire value x, get this ciphertext. Now I have the short label. Decrypt it, I will get the long label. Right? Unfortunately, everything looks so good, but what's the problem? The problem is that there are just so many different rings going on here, right? We have an underlying computation ring, which is R, where the short label and the long label all sits in that ring. Now, I am pretending that I have an encryption scheme which has the key space and the message space both agreeing the same, and they're both the ring of my computation. That just never happens, unfortunately. And this is, in fact, the key challenge we have to tackle. So, but let's for now pretend that everything is fine. The key space and the ring, message space is just my underlying ring R. Then how do I see security? Well, security is basically, I want to simulate using the output label L, and I claim that the input is public. What do I want to simulate? I want to simulate those table, ciphertext 1, ciphertext 2, and together with the short label S. Well, basically, I can first pretend that it is basically information theoretically identical if instead of sampling ciphertext 1 and ciphertext 2 first and compute ciphertext in the evaluation, I could actually first just generate my output ciphertext using some short label I sample myself and the long label, which I want to simulate, the simulator has. And given the ciphertext 1, I can always recompute ciphertext 2, subject to the correctness constraints. This is what we do all the time. Now what do we get? Well, as long as my short label AX plus B actually hides A, which it will, we need to make sure that, then ciphertext 1 is actually hiding. The key is not revealed anywhere. And hence I can simulate it randomly. Now I arrive at the simulation, right? Because the simulation gets a long label L and samples this as itself and generates the Garble table in a random and computed way. All right, so everything is so perfect, but what happens? Oh, so far I need to tell you that how can I make the wire value public? In fact, that's actually really easy because I can just modify my underlying computation. Before key extension is going to happen, I'm going to hide the wire value, the true wire value x prime, using a random scalar, let it go through the key extension, and then subtract away this random scalar. So these random scalars are going to be, you can think about as constants in the arithmetic garbling. I was gonna garble. Okay. Can write out the labels and it works out. All right, so let me now tell you, just give you one taste about what happens when the message and the key space is not agreeing with my computation. Okay, so for that, we really don't have generic solutions. We have to look at the specific linear homomorphic encryption scheme we are using and come up with a solution. So one simple linear homomorphic encryption we can have is based on the Paillier groups. You don't have to look at a lot of the specific. Just know that Paillier group elements is kind of a product of elements in a hard subgroup with elements in an easy subgroup. The hard subgroup has unknown order and the easy subgroup has known order. Now, what does it mean that it is unknown or it is hard? It is because that if I give you a random hard group element, it's actually indistinguishable from just a uniform random group element. And what does it mean for it to be easy? Easy means that if I give you an easy subgroup element, you can actually discrete log in efficiently. Okay. So how do we build a linear homomorphic encryption scheme out of it? It's basically very similar to algorithm encryption from DDH. You basically run DDH in the hard group. Here we have G to the R, think about them as published. And then to encrypt using key A, we do G to the R times A. And then we leave the message we want to encrypt in the easy group. Now, if you have the key A, you can just raise to G to the R, cancel out the hard group, discrete log in the easy group, you will get the message back. Well, like in the case of DDH, this is very linearly homomorphic. And furthermore, the linear homomorphism is parallel in the key space in the hard subgroup and in the easy subgroup, right? So if I do just take this ciphertext, this group element, and raise it to X and multiply with another ciphertext, I will exactly get what I want. An encryption encrypted under AX plus B for the message of CX plus D. Now, what's the problem? The message space is some Z into the C. Let's pretend for a second that this is the space we want, the same as the ring computation. But the key space is something really weird, right? It is this hard group exponent space, and in fact, it has unknown size. But I can always pretend that this is just key space is over the integers, right? If I get AX plus B over the integers, clearly I can still decrypt. Now the problem is, if I get a short label in the space of Z into the C, how do I get the value over Z back? It turns out that if the computation is B bounded, then that's really simple because I can always make sure that the value, it means that the value X is always B bounded, and I can choose A and B in a way that the whole AX plus B is much smaller than N to the C, right? Then basically the modular arithmetic doesn't take effect. That's what we do. In fact, the Paillier key can actually be pretty short. And we just make sure that B is going to be significantly larger than A times X, so that the short label indeed hides the key A. And everything needs to be smaller than N to the C, so that given this, I can recover the value over the integer. And security holds because we actually, as I argued before, AX plus B, which is the short label, hides the key A. So now let's put it back together. In this key extension, we're sort of get AX plus B mod N to the C, and we recover it over the integers. This will allow me to decrypt this homomorphically evaluated ciphertext, and I will obtain the output label CX plus D mod N to the C. Suppose I have LWE, how do we do that? It is very similar because in LWE, we just have ciphertext, which is take A, which is a vector now, B is a matrix, and plus the value I want to encrypt with a multiplier so that it doesn't, I can decrypt correctly. Linear homomorphism again works, and I have the same problem. The key space is in fact ZQ, and my message space is some ZP, which is significantly smaller. But again, we're going to pretend that the key space is just over the integers, and using the same method, we can work with the integer key space. So
how is your solution from LWE different from AIK?
it's very similar after, if you go back to AIK and try to kind of map everything back, it's essentially the same scheme. But I think what we do is we have this slightly more abstract idea, and then that allow us to do also with DCR. And once you go to the ZP computation, the mixed computation, then it's completely different because AIK doesn't really handle this computation. I don't have time to tell you the technique there. These two are significantly more complicated than the bounded integer computation. And the main problem is the same. And it's because that say that I have a key space which is over the integer and have message space which is over ZP, where ZP is exactly the computation ring. Now, I can never have the case, right, given AX plus B, the short label mod P, to recover AX plus B over Z. That will just never happen. And we have to use very special distributions of choosing those, but nevertheless, we can actually do that. But in order to recover the integer value from the mod p value, we choose very, very specific distribution of A and B. I don't have time to tell you that, but I think you've got the main idea. Yeah. Let me go to the last slide of some open questions. One is, now that we can do constant rate arithmetic garbling in a way that is somewhat concretely efficient. I'm not really claiming concrete efficiency, but there is a ray of hope. But compared to IO and compared to FHE and ABE schemes, right? I believe that. And that I'm very confident. But what stops us in bounded integer computation? If we want to think big, what about constant rate Boolean garbling? And constant rate Zp garbling? Who says we cannot do that? And for the mixed computation that I didn't tell you about, I think it has some potential for practical applications. But the bit decomposition gadget is pretty inefficient, which I showed you, which is quadratic overhead with growing with the key length of the DCR. And one can think about specific Boolean computations that we really care about. There are many, for example, threshold, truncation, comparison. Can we design much more efficient gadget that allows us to handle arithmetic computation in a natural way, and then an efficient gadget that handles these computations? And that would really allow us to basically deal with like machine learning models. And finally, of course, more assumptions. What's so special about Paillier and LWE?
So homomorphism is necessary to the approach, but you're saying that beyond that we need more. That what
Yeah. For example, I need also arithmetic, like linear homomorphism of the message space and being able to decrypt it. And that's what Paillier gave and DDH doesn't have. But potentially this more arithmetic approach will also have use even in the Boolean computation setting.
Thank you.
So I guess like so I guess like in we usually think about like security, probably security of zero. So I guess this is probably secure against a malicious evaluator. But is it secure against a malicious garbler? Is it adaptive? What?
Malicious garbler seems not hopeful because, malicious garbler, no, it's certainly not. And I don't even know that we have any definition of garbling that handles malicious garbler. Because then you basically know the garbler outputs the garble circuit and the label functions, right? So if you know the garbler, you.
Yeah. We do have techniques.
And I think courses and
in the context of 2BC it makes sense, but in the context of garbling.
It's strictly more general. You can think of a general two argument function xy and the garbling.
Sure. In that case, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So still that's also enough.
We didn't handle the cut and choose, whether you can do cut and choose for this kind of garbling. Yeah.
If you don't have a computation.
Right. And also, I wanted to ask about the great efficiency of the evaluator. Do you guys have any estimates on that? Like, you guys compare it?
Well, you can see it from our design paradigm. Basically, you have to do this. You have to do this key evaluation. Like, I think the basic addition and the multiplication garbling is quite efficient, right? You're just each addition is one addition, one ring addition, and each multiplication is kind of constant overhead. It's just a key extension. And if you look at our key extension in the Paillier, we're just doing one Paillier decryption for each key extension, proportional to the length of the output labels you want to get. Yeah, you're just doing multiplication, paying the price of how long output label you want.
This is more of an important question. So typically in the natural, algebraic complexity, what you want to do is to start with arithmetic. You want to preserve the arithmetic circuit by basically getting arithmetic circuit.
Yeah,
You can always do the Boolean thing, but then you lose a lot.
it's not really Boolean. If you think about what do I need to do, I need to do like addition,
Boolean, but you lose the
multiplication.
arithmetic structure. Okay, sure.
Yeah, I need to do addition and multiplication over the ring, and I need to do this decryption. In the case of Paillier, then there will be basically modulo arithmetic mod n. It's not the same ring as the underlying ring. In the case of LWE, it's going to be modulo arithmetic over ZQ for a Q that is bigger than my underlying ring. So it's still fairly arithmetic. Your question, can we start from, if I want to just garble ring R computation, can I have a garbling which is also just ring R computation? That's a fully black box in the underlying ring, and we know we cannot do that. Have to leverage some property of the underlying ring.
Okay, thank you.